We are chapter 10 of John. And really, what's happening here is it's a continuing dialogue that Jesus is having with some of the leadership of Israel. Okay? So by way of reminder, last week we were able to watch by newscast, but more than that, a man that was born blind was healed. And he was healed on the Sabbath day, and so there's this big controversy of who is Jesus and what gives him the right, if he is the Christ, and I'm just saying this in my words, if he is the Christ, then why would he break the Sabbath? He can't be the Christ. Even all these good works that he's doing, so there's people are wondering, all these good things that he's doing, how can this be not be the Christ? And so I'd like you to go back just a little bit in chapter 9 of John, and I want you to look at what the blind man says in verse 32. Here's a man that was blind from birth, and now he sees, and he's talking to the religious leaders, and he says, "Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard of that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us?" And they put him out. Jesus heard that they had put him out. Finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "And who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you." In verse 38, he says, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. So here picks up the ongoing discussion that rolls right into chapter 10. And most of you know that the original writing didn't have the separation of chapters, so we're just rolling right on through Scripture here. And so here's what Jesus says next. He says, "For judgment I came into the world." So this is verse 39 of John 9. "For judgment I came into the world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, "We are not blind too, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, 'We see,' your sins remain." So Jesus speaks to them about their own sin. And when he's saying, since you say we see, that's that they understand about God and they understand about sin, and they understand this, and they're saying, "We understand," or "We see." And he says, since you say this, your sin remains. You're not getting it. So then he goes into a picture that he uses about sheep and a shepherd to bring home the point that they have been wrong, or they have been bad in their leadership of the nation of Israel. So he brings this picture to them, and first he says it, and then he explains it. So it comes right after them saying, "Are we blind too? Are you saying, Jesus, that we have a problem?" And here's Jesus' response. So he paints this picture, and he begins, and he uses the word "truly, truly." So listen very closely. "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door of the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. So we're going to stop there and just look at this a little bit first, but Jesus explains what he's talking about next. But let's go back. So he's painting this sheepfold, this place where the sheep are gathered in for protection, for safety. And there's a door. And he explains that those who don't come in through the door have a bad intention for the sheep. And he says if they climb over the wall, they're considered thieves and robbers. Okay, so he's painting this picture again, and he's really conveying to them, who are you in this picture? Okay. So I think it's interesting that he does this contrast throughout this whole thing. He says there's thieves and robbers, and then he says in verse 2, but he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him, the doorkeeper opens, and there's three things that happen. It says here, the sheep hear his voice, and it says, he calls each of them by name. Now, I want to ask this family over here, Wyatt, what is the name of the one that is so close to you? Where's Wyatt? I saw him somewhere. Sadie. Okay. Are most of your sheep, do they most of them have names, or all of them? They all have names. Okay. All right. Is there any called Steve in there? No Steves? Okay. Just wondering. But what a picture that he's painting, that really God knows each by name, and they hear his voice. They hear the sound of his voice, and they hear their name being called. And then the third thing that happens in this loving sheepfold is that he leads them. It says he leads them out. So they're in this protective place at night, and then it says he leads them out. When he puts forth all of his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And then he contrasts again. He jumps back to really talking about the Pharisees of that day and saying, a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Okay. A stranger does harm. Now, in the chapter before, we see how the shepherds of Israel at that time, how they were behaving. And so it sounds like the people were afraid of the leadership. Do you remember when they interviewed the parents to say, is this really your son? And how did he receive his sight? They said, he's our son, but go ask him. And then the scripture records the reason they said that is that there was the word came out from the leadership that anybody that confessed that Jesus was the Christ would be kicked out of the synagogue. Now, it may not be a big thing to us in our culture, but what would that have been like to be kicked out? So here they're threatening the people, saying, you're going to be kicked out. So, Pastor Van Vleck, in that culture, to be kicked out of the synagogue, what was some of the ramifications from being kicked out of the synagogue? It wasn't just like a church building. It was more than that. What are some things that come to mind?
Just it would have been a break with family members.
Okay.
Good standing in the community. It was the place where you went to hear the word of God, to worship the Lord.
Okay.
So you're really out, separated from the flock.
Okay. So if you didn't hear Pastor Steve, he said separated from the flock, speaking in sheep terms, but he's saying that this is where life revolved, is in the synagogue, and really families were disrupted because you would have families still be in and you would be kicked out. So it's this being ostracized, that you're out. And I was thinking, even this morning we were talking that even trading and borrowing things and things that were so free to do in a community, all of a sudden they tell the rest of the community, you no longer have association with them. They're bad people because of this. So just saying that to paint what the leadership is doing. And so when the blind man is healed, they talk to the blind man. The blind man comes back and says, really, I believe him, because no one can heal a man born that was born blind. No one can give him his sight. And what did they do? They kicked him out. So they threatened the others and they kicked him out. So he was cut off. Now, his life had been begging, wasn't it? I mean, he was at the mercy of anybody else, and now he can't even be with family. This blind man is kicked out. So what is Jesus trying to communicate about the leadership of Israel at that time? That they weren't leading, but they were trying to herd the sheep. So there's a difference there, isn't there? And we find out from sheep people that you call them and they follow you. And we even find out from Scripture, Jesus said, this is the way it's supposed to be. They know the shepherd's voice, and he calls them by name, and he leads them. He doesn't chase them. Go. That's not part of it. But that looks like what they're doing, doesn't it? Trying to herd the sheep. Okay, so Jesus paints this picture, and he's doing the contrast. Here's the right way to lead. When you go in through the door, you are the shepherd. And here's the wrong way. When you climb over the fence, you're a thief and a robber. So there's the wrong way. And they simply won't follow. They won't follow a stranger's voice. Jesus had quite a following at this time, didn't he? Up to now, at least in the Gospel of John, this was the sixth miracle done. That's all they were talking about. People, he fed over 5,000. I mean, he had such a following. So here's Jesus just really painting this out. And he's beginning to say that they'll follow the true shepherd, the one that they trust, that they'll know his voice. And he calls them by name. So he's doing this contrast, and he's bringing up what he's going to say next to them about what that all means. And we've just kind of had a pretest, a trailer to what Jesus is about to do. That's interesting, a voice and knowing that voice. Maybe some of you have done this. A loved one has passed away, but their voice is still on the phone recorder. Does anybody still have a phone recording of mom or dad? Yeah, there's a few of you. Isn't that amazing? After a while, it seems like you forget what their sound is, but somebody might come to you and say, you know what, you sound just like your mom, or you sound just like your dad. Just talk, and there you can hear it again. But then when you hear that voice again on the recorder, it's amazing. One time I was working down in Oak Harbor. I think I was sharing with you, and I was working on lighting up above where the carts are, and I heard the voice. So I was having to climb over the rafters, and I heard a voice of a friend that I knew years ago, and that's his voice. What is he doing here? So I'm up there, and I'm scrambling across the rafters, and then I've got to go down my ladder, and I was just so excited to see him, and I scrambled down, and I came down my ladder, and I'm looking around. I couldn't find him, so I went into the store, and I went around the store, and I was looking everywhere, but that voice was it brought back a flood of memories of time we'd spent together. It was so close, and then it was like smoke. It was gone. Different than around here. It was gone. He was gone. But that kind of intimacy is what we're going to see next here. And first Jesus calls them out, and you know Jesus knows their heart, and he's speaking right to their heart, and there's no way around that. They know exactly what Jesus is saying. So it says in verse 6, the figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not understand what those things were which he was saying to them. Verse 7, Jesus therefore said to them again, truly, truly. So here he is about to explain what he was meaning. I am the door of the sheep. Wow. Okay, so what he was talking about earlier, he said the only way in, Jesus is the only way in. I am the door in to this family, into this life, into this sheepfold. I am the door. And then he says this in verse 8, all who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. All of the leadership that came before him are thieves and robbers. How could Jesus say that? All of the leaders. Okay, so let's look at this for a minute. In the Old Testament, it records there was somewhere around 40 kings. Out of 40 kings between the northern tribe and the southern tribe, out of the 40, there were only 8 good kings. At least that's what I counted. Is that amazing? That the rest of them were hurting the people. They were leading them into idolatry. They were out for their own gain. So, interesting. Jesus says, all that came before me. Well, you could say that, but he said all. And then I started looking at, well, how about, they celebrate David so much because in the line of David would be this Messiah would come. So what about David? Yeah, David was good. He was a good king. And then he even had a soldier killed because he wanted his wife. It's like, oh, so yeah, okay. Even the most celebrated of people in Israel, David, he even did harm. And his son even did harm by inviting these foreign wives in and began to put up these other places of worship. And so I looked at that and I went, there could be only one good king. Do you remember even when Israel wanted, up to this point, God was leading them through prophets, and Samuel was the prophet. And the people cried out and said, we want to have a king like all the other nations. And God said to Samuel, we're going to listen to their voice. However, know that they're rejecting me as king. Isn't that something? And so started a whole line of kings like the other nations. They rejected following God, his plan, and God said, okay, we'll see how this works for you. Interesting. Only 8 good kings out of all that, and then even the ones. So here we have people that Jesus is speaking right to them saying, you are thieves and robbers. Now looking at that, looking up those two terms, thieves and robbers, looking at the Greek dictionary, there are words like, for the thief it was taking of what is not theirs. Okay, that makes sense. But listen to the words that described a robber. Taking property by violence. So thieves and robbers, that you're hurting the sheep. Here's another question I had. What were they going to steal? They jumped over into the sheepfold, and were they looking for, a halter, a rope? Did they want to steal a halter or rope? Let's see, what do you steal from a sheepfold? They wanted the sheep. What? No, they didn't want the stuff that was in it. The thieves and robbers were after the sheep. Well, who owned the sheep? Creator God made us all in the image of him. He had a design and a plan for each of us to live in his plan, his purpose, his plan. And so now we're seeing he's calling them out saying, you are thieves and robbers because you're after my people that I've created. My people. Is that interesting? Now we get to the point of, oh, okay, so what is he's saying? They're stealing people. They're stealing sheep. So he goes on to say, I am the door. So in verse 7, I'm the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door, so he says it again. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved. Saved. Saved from what? He will be saved. Can you say he will be safe? You could say that too, but saved from the thieves and robbers. Saved from danger. Okay, so he who comes in there by the door will be saved. And then he'll go in and out and find pasture. There's going to be a safety environment. Whoever comes in through there will safely go in and out and find pasture. And okay, so there's this tranquil idea of this shepherd, of whoever comes in through this door. There's going to be safety and security there and find pasture. And isn't it amazing that earlier in chapter 6 of John, Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. I'm the water. I'm life. Isn't that interesting? And here he's talking about the sheep and he's saying, okay, I'm the door. I'm the only access in and out. And then when people come in through the door, they will go in and out and find pasture. And then he says, he contrasts again that tranquil life, and he says, a thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. So the thief is taking and then harming, almost like not even using, but taking and harming. And it looks like there's a progression here when it says he comes to steal. So what about stealing? What are some of the things that have to be in place for somebody to steal something? I don't know. What are some of the elements that helps a thief to steal something? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? Yeah.
Unguarded.
Okay, unguarded. You're not prepared. What else would be part of it?
Darkness.
Okay, under the cover of darkness. You know, during daylight, it's kind of, you've got things you have to hide behind and people can see from a distance, but as soon as it's dark, that's kind of your cover, okay? So to steal, there's that going on. Anything else? Unguarded, darkness, anything else? Shadows? Okay, use the shadows. You're in the shadows. You get in and out of the shadows.
Secrecy or deception.
Secrecy, and then Todd said deception, and that's where I was headed. Every single act of one who's going to steal is deception. If I can get them to look that way, think of a pickpocket. If I can get them distracted, then I can grab their money. Deception, under cover of night, to steal, to deception. That's the whole. It's a trick. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever done this to you, but they'll say, "Look, there's a bird," and you look and they take your water bottle. You have my water bottle. But he says steal. So first of all, steal. And then he says kill. And if that wasn't enough, destroy. Now, just looking at to kill here, the dictionary, the Greek dictionary talked about it being kind of like a sacrifice or a slaying. Now, many of you have been around when you do slay an animal, when you cut its throat. That's the final. If you can get close enough to the animal, and those of you who hunt, you shoot it first, but then you get close enough to bleed it out. And for sure, that's it. My folks had cattle when I was growing up, and one time I was just scared to death because my uncle shot the cow, and so I'm standing with my uncle. I don't know if I was 10 or whatever, and the cow drops down like, what just happened? And then he stood up and he came right at us, and I'm going, wow, this cow is mad. You just shot him. And then my uncle goes up close enough and comes alongside, and he cuts his throat. And as soon as the blood ran out, the animal was down. That was it. You didn't have to shoot it again. Steal, kill, and then destroy. And this destroy word can be both temporary and eternal. So isn't that interesting that Jesus is saying a thief comes to steal, deception, kill, and then finally to destroy for eternity. Kill just is that temporary in the light of eternity. That brings a huge impact on what's happening here. There are some things that are going on right now that to you and to me that is trying to steal what God has started. Okay? Can you think of things? You don't have to mention those, but think of things that are trying to steal what is holy and right and pure. There's a deception going on in the world around us to steal our minds, our way of thinking, to steal our focus on God. Just want to bring up a few verses, a few cross-reference verses. I'd like you to go to 1 John chapter 2. 1 John 2. So back by Revelation, just go back there and then thumb into 1 John. And he talks about the world. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. He said, "Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." And listen to this. "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world." Those three things, the lust of the flesh, if it feels good, do it. The lust of the eyes, it looks good, you want that. The lust of it, the drive behind it, that you can have it. And then the pride of life, look at me. Look at what I have accomplished. The world around us is at constant trying to steal your mind, away from God's teaching. There's a lot of men that I've been talking to later, and they're saying things like, when I was younger, when my grandma taught me about Jesus, she was right after all. For a lot of you, when you were kids, you learned the truth of who God is and his great love. And then somehow you get off track for maybe years. And then God, in his mercy and grace, he kept after you and he pulled you back in. And today you're saying, I'm so thankful. I'd be lost without him. God is so patient, isn't he? Amen. And so as Jesus is talking about, look out. Look out for this leadership that's leading you astray. They're wanting to harm you and not do good. Jesus says, verse 10, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. And I came that they may have life and might have it abundantly." And life there is, the top of life is Jesus. And that's eternity, isn't it? And abundantly. This life that he's designed for you and for me for all eternity. And then he says, not only is he the door, the entrance into the sheepfold, entrance into the kingdom, he says, I am the good shepherd. He's both. And we've heard stories, I don't know much about sheep, but how the shepherd would lie in the entrance of the door, and he would be the door, and he would be the shepherd too. And he says, I am the good shepherd. And in a way, he's saying to those Pharisees, you are thieves and robbers, but I am the true and good shepherd. Everything that I do is for the best for my sheep. Isn't that amazing? I am the good shepherd. And he says, I lay my life down for the sheep. And he describes what contrast again. He said, the hireling and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, beholds a wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. And he flees because he is a hireling and is not concerned about the sheep. So he's telling them again, this is what you look like. You're out for your own. You're not out for the sheep. I lay my life down for the sheep, but you run. You leave them to their own. Amazing picture of this God. I wonder if they were also thinking about King David. It was recorded that when King David saw what was happening with Goliath standing there, and he wanted to come in and fight Goliath, David says, you know what? This Goliath is no big deal. Because when I was tending my father's sheep as a youth, when a bear came, I chased that bear down and I took the sheep out of his mouth and I killed the bear. What? And he says, when a lion did the same thing, I went after the lion and I took it out of its, and I killed the lion. This Philistine is nothing. What? Are you kidding? That's supernatural. I don't think I've ever heard of a teenage boy running after a bear or a lion and killing it and taking the sheep back again. I wonder if this imagery was coming when he was saying, they don't protect, but I do. I would jeopardize my life. Did David jeopardize his life when he went after that sheep? You bet, but there was something else running through his veins and through his lungs that he was not going to let one of the sheep be destroyed, be killed, be stolen. He was not going to let that happen. That's incredible to think about. This Goliath is nothing. I've experienced God's power. Have you? Have you experienced God's supernatural power running through you? That you chose to do the righteous thing instead of what the world does, and instead of the deception of the world, like, you know what, most of the people do this, so I'm going to do this too. Or did you take a stand and you go, nope, I'm going to stand God's way. Do you know that's supernatural? Because the natural man cannot do the righteous. I mean, maybe for a day or two. Wow. But God knows the heart. He says again in 14, I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Do you know him? How do you know him? Do you know what his voice sounds like? And I don't mean audible. I mean, do you know when he's speaking to you? What's that like when you go, I know? He says, they know me and I know them. Do you know that special relationship? He says, even as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. Verse 16, I have other sheep which are not of this fold, and I must bring them also, and they shall hear my voice, and they shall become one flock with one shepherd. And you know, we're echoing Genesis chapter 12 when he says, all the nations will be blessed through you, Abraham. And then we know that the Gentiles, it was open. If you're not a Jewish person here today, you are welcomed. You are the other sheep. Welcome into the fold. Isn't that amazing? For the reason the Father loves me is because I lay my life down that I may take it up again. Wow. No one has taken it away from me. I lay it down on my own. My own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. there arose a division among the Jews because of these words, and many of them were saying, he has a demon and he's insane. Why do you listen to him? Others were saying, these are the sayings. Others were saying, these are not the sayings of one demon possessed. A demon cannot open the eyes of a blind man, can he? So they just saw what happened. They're hearing this. Even there's a division in the leadership. Who is he? Can this be the one? No one can open the eyes of the blind. Wow. He's the good shepherd. If you've believed in the Lord Jesus, you've heard his voice. You've sensed him calling you. And for many of you, he's been calling you for a long time. And he's patient. He's waiting for you to respond, because this belief that the Bible talks about is not just head knowledge, but it's a life of, I'm going to follow. With all that I am, I'm going to follow Jesus' teaching. And he's waiting for you. Come on. Come back. Come back. The beauty about our shepherd is that he never stops giving us chance after chance. Because he loves his creation. He loves you. And he desires the very best for you. Even at times, if it seems like an electric fence. We saw in the video. Take the little lamb up to the electric fence. How brutal is that? Shock that little bugger and he's not going to want to get out. Sometimes it seems like that with God, doesn't it? Is that there's some things that hurt us. And he says, learn well. Learn well and trust me. And many of you are going through things like that where you're going, maybe it's easier to do things the world's way. Because I've been trying so hard God's way and don't even do it. And maybe even here today you're going, I have no place else to turn. God's way is always best. He always proves that over and over again. He's the good shepherd.